Hi all, my name is Isadora Krsek,
And I am Kimi Wenzel.
and we are grateful to be sharing our research on the behalf of our colleagues Sauvik, Jason Hong, and Laura Dabbish. According to the 2021 Norton Global Cyber Safety Insights Report, a little over half of Internet users surveyed have experienced a cybercrime of some kind, and around 8 out of 10 Internet users want to do more to protect their privacy. Despite these sentiments, as well as the attempts to raise the security sensitivity of the general populace, the advice of experts is largely ignored. Much research has been done looking into the factors that render online security and privacy decision-making especially complex. Previous research from behavioral economics has highlighted bounded rationality and cognitive biases as key hindrances to the capabilities of users in security and privacy decision-making. Even when users are fully informed of security and privacy best practices, they struggle to consider long-term consequences, ultimately making decisions that leave themselves, and sometimes others, vulnerable and insecure. Furthermore, information on privacy risks are difficult for people to find, understand, and implement, making users' existing penchant for defaults all the more impactful. Because of this, many users will knowingly accept certain risks to their online privacy to make their lives more convenient. Individual differences such as end-user security attitudes, demographic characteristics, or personality can also shape users' online security and privacy decision-making behavior. A growing number of studies have shown social influence to be a proven method for guiding users' security and privacy behavior. However, much of this prior work focuses on the influence of personal connections. Furthermore, the social metadata necessary to show people personalized peer recommendations is rarely available. Reflective writing is another promising intervention that has become an established methodology in several fields. In the context of consumer behavior, reflecting and writing about future outcomes can positively aid decision-making. Research on how reflective writing can affect security and privacy decisions, however, is limited. This lack of prior work may be because writing can be cognitively demanding and time-consuming. Though, unlike other interventions which are externally motivated, reflective writing may provide users with more intrinsic motivation, making it a powerful and promising point of innovation. How effective is social influence from non-personal, non-expert reference groups, such as the public at large, at encouraging safer configuration of security and privacy settings? Collecting recommendation information from this referent group may be more scalable and cost-effective, so it's worth understanding its efficacy at encouraging end users to configure more secure online security and privacy settings relative to expert and default recommendations. We're also interested in understanding how effective reflective writing is as a tool for behavioral persuasion when applied to the field of security and privacy, and whether individual differences affect the outcome of these behavioral persuasion interventions. To answer these questions, we developed a study where we investigated the efficacy of these two interventions as tools for behavior persuasion in security and privacy. We chose to pull settings from Facebook because of its various categories of information disclosure, its widespread use, and because of the wealth of social psychology literature published on the social networking platform. We recruited Facebook users from Amazon Mechanical Turk to participate in a 2x4 mixed design survey-based experiment, where they were asked to configure 14 security and privacy-related settings for their Facebook accounts. Reflective writing was implemented within subjects, while non-personal social influence was between subjects. For the reflective writing manipulation, participants were asked to write a reflection for 7 of the 14 total settings they viewed. For these 7 settings, the reflection came before their setting choice selection. In the prompt, participants were asked to first consider what setting configuration they would choose, and then write about how that choice would affect their experience on Facebook. For our non-personal social influence manipulation, participants were sorted into one of 4 different conditions which determined the type of referent information they saw while deciding on a setting configuration. In the first, participants saw cybersecurity experts' opinions, and in the second, they saw the suggestion of the general public. In the third condition, which acted as our real-world control, we displayed the default configuration for a particular setting on Facebook. And in the last condition, which was our experimental control, the participant was not exposed to any suggestion. The suggestions for both the general public and cybersecurity expert groups were sourced from 2 prior surveys, which we conducted in the fall of 2019, where we collected Facebook setting configuration suggestions of 10 cybersecurity experts and 200 Facebook users from mTurk. Interestingly, we found that the majority suggestions from both the expert and the crowd worker groups were identical, while the default configuration given by Facebook differed from the suggestions of experts and the crowd workers for nearly all instances. I'll now hand things off to Kimi, who will discuss the results.
We'll start by looking at participants' configuration patterns in this frequency bar chart. Looking at the darker navy bars, we can see that participants in the non-personal social influence conditions, expert and public, chose the configuration suggested to them roughly 70% of the time. This is about twice the frequency that participants in the Facebook default condition chose the default suggestion. Also notice how participants in the control condition, represented by the light blue bars, compare to the corresponding suggestion choices. There's about a 10% significant difference in the non-personal social influence conditions, and only a 2% non-significant difference in the Facebook default condition. We also ran several logistic regressions to analyze the effect of our interventions. Specifically, we were investigating how our interventions affected participants' likelihood to select what we called the suggested best practice configuration. And the suggested best practice configuration refers to the setting configuration that cybersecurity experts most recommended and that which is generally considered the more private or secure option. We found that those in the non-personal social influence conditions were about 63% more likely to select the suggested best practice configuration. Through a pairwise Tukey post-hoc test, we found no significant difference between the expert condition and the public condition. There was no significant main effect of the Facebook default condition when we modeled the suggested best practice configuration as the outcome, and there was also no main effect found when we modeled selecting the Facebook default condition as the outcome. However, we found an interaction effect between the Facebook default condition and the reflective writing condition. So, when participants in the Facebook default condition engaged in reflective writing, they were about 73% more likely to select the suggested best practice configuration. There were no other significant interaction effects. When looking at the reflective writing intervention alone and its main effect, it actually made participants less likely to choose the suggested best practice configuration. So, in other words, reflective writing was beneficial only in the Facebook default condition, but was detrimental in the social influence conditions. We also looked at how individual differences affected participants' likelihood to choose a suggested best practice configuration. We found that participants whose collective identity score was above the median were about 61% more likely to select the best practice configuration, and participants whose passive Facebook user score were below the median were about 34% less likely to select the suggested best practice configuration. In addition to these quantitative findings, we also had some qualitative findings. We looked at all reflective writing responses and did an open coding. The most common motivator for participants selecting their setting configuration was cybersecurity concerns. For example, people justified their setting selection out of a worry about leaking private information or a desire to protect themselves from something like being hacked. About 57% of the reflective writing responses were in reference to such cybersecurity experiences. The second most common motivator, at about 22%, was social experiences. Here, people were not concerned about having their personal information be public, but rather they were more concerned with monitoring which of their family, friends, or coworkers could see their content, what type of self-image they displayed online, and networking. There was also a code for user experience. These participants described experience and interface complaints about certain privacy and security features, and had these complaints as a motivating factor for their decisions, often opting out of settings that would bring them greater security. Next was unaffected experience. These participants expressed some apathy towards their setting selection, and generally had an attitude suggesting that their setting choice didn't matter. The last important code we had was vacillate experience, in which participants could not come to a setting decision confidently. They often had trouble deciding between two setting configurations, or did not really understand the functionality of a setting. Now, discovering what motivations users had for their setting configurations and the prevalence of each motivation was interesting, but we were also curious how these motivations matched up to the setting configurations themselves. So, we ran several more logistic regressions, with each qualitative code serving as the independent variable in their own models, and with the suggested best practice configuration as the dependent variable. We found a very strong association with the cybersecurity experience code. Participants with cybersecurity codes were about 80% more likely to choose the suggested best practice configuration. Social experience reflections had participants about 35% less likely to choose the suggested best practice configuration. User experience reflections were at 29%, and unaffected experience reflections were at 8%. Finally, moving on to our key contributions, we introduced two behavioral persuasion interventions to the field of cybersecurity, those being non-personal social influence and reflective writing. We examine how these two interventions may influence security and privacy setting configurations. We also examine how their effects may vary based on collective identity and social media use patterns. And finally, we introduce a taxonomy of user security and privacy setting configuration motivation. Our findings suggest that recommendations from public groups may be an effective, scalable, and broadly applicable method for improving end-user security and privacy decisions. Furthermore, Suggestions from security and privacy experts and from the public are equally effective intervention tools. Regarding reflective writing, we suggest that reflective writing may be an effective tool when used in default interfaces. However, it should not be combined with social influence interventions. We hope our research inspires future work in usable privacy and security, and if you're interested in learning more, we invite you to read our paper or reach out to any one of the researchers. Thank you!